Hello, friends. Today, we're going to talk about something that happened a long time ago, on April 10th, 1912. It's all about a super-duper big ship called the Titanic. This ship was the biggest and fanciest thing on the water back then. It was like a floating palace. So, the Titanic was going on its very first trip from England to New York. Lots of different people were on board, rich folks, famous actors, and people who were hoping for a better life in America. The captain of the ship was a man named Captain Edward John Smith. He was 62 years old and very experienced. People were super excited about the Titanic because it was not just the biggest ship but also super fancy. I mean, it cost a whopping $7.5 million to build back then, which today would be like $400 million. Inside the Titanic, it was like a fancy hotel. There were beautiful stained glass windows, fancy wood panels, 2 grand staircases, a heated swimming pool, a Turkish bath, an electric bath, imagine that, a gym, a squash court, 4 restaurants, 2 barber shops, and even a library. Now, they called the Titanic Unsinkable because it had 2 really cool safety features. First, it had a double-bottom hull, which means it had 2 layers at the bottom to keep it safe. Second, the ship was split into 16 separate watertight rooms, so even if some of them got filled with water, the ship could still float. The company that built the Titanic was so sure it was unsinkable that they told everyone. They even said it in the newspapers. But guess what? 2 days after it started, on April 12, 1912, the Titanic got ice warnings. You see, they were crossing the ocean, and there were big ice mountains floating around. Other ships sent warnings to the Titanic to be careful. The Titanic tried to avoid the ice, but they didn't slow down. They were going really fast, like 40 kilometers an hour. Then, on the night of April 14, 1912, something bad happened. It was dark because there was no moonlight. There was a guy up in a special lookout spot called the Crow's Nest, and it was super cold and windy. At 11:39 p.m., the lookout guy saw a huge iceberg in front of the Titanic. He rang the bell to warn everyone, and they tried to turn the ship away, but it was too late. At 11:40 p.m., the Titanic hit the iceberg. This iceberg was like a football field-sized mountain of ice. It was so big and heavy that it made a big dent in the side of the Titanic and punched some holes in it. So, even though the ship was supposed to be unsinkable, it wasn't. They had 2 safety things, remember? The double-bottom hull and the watertight rooms. But the iceberg hit the side, where there was only 1 layer of metal, and it broke through 6 of the watertight rooms. That's more than the 4 it could handle. So, the Titanic started to sink. They sent out a message for help, and a ship called the Carpathia got there about 3.5 hours later. But here's a really sad thing. There were not enough lifeboats for everyone. You see, they thought the Titanic was unsinkable, so they didn't have enough lifeboats. So, lots of people didn't get a chance to be in a lifeboat. Some people were not even scared because they believed the ship couldn't sink. The company that made the Titanic said it over and over again. But when they saw the ship sinking, there was chaos. People were fighting to get into lifeboats. Can you imagine that? By 1 a.m., so much water was inside the ship that the front part went underwater. The back part with the propellers came out of the water, and everything was a mess. The ship broke into 2 pieces and sank around 2:20 a.m. It took less than 3 hours for the unsinkable Titanic to disappear into the ocean. Around 1,500 people didn't make it. The water was freezing cold, and they couldn't survive for long. The rescue ship Carpathia saved some people, but it was too late for many. Other ships could have come to help, but they didn't, and that's really sad. A lot of mistakes were made that night. There were not enough lifeboats, the captain didn't do safety drills, and they were going too fast. Some people think the company that made the Titanic wanted it to be super fast and didn't care about being safe. So, the Titanic sank, and it changed the rules for ships. New safety rules were made, like having enough lifeboats for everyone. They also started looking out for icebergs better. In 1985, some explorers found the Titanic deep under the ocean, all broken into pieces. And now, it's slowly disappearing because of the water and stuff. Even after all these years, people still find the Titanic fascinating. Some even wanted to make a new Titanic called Titanic 2. But it's taking a long time, and maybe it will never sail because it doesn't have TVs or YF, so that's the story of the Titanic. It was a big, fancy, and not so unsinkable ship that met a sad end. Thanks for listening, and remember, the Titanic taught us important lessons about being safe on the water.